go for Gin on the outside, and down the stretch they come. And Holy Bull has led every step of the way, and Mike Smith aboard, wire-to-wire winner.
Welcome back to another TwinSpires video preview. Nick Tammaro here, taking a look at Saturday's Holy Bull at Gulfstream Park. Hard to believe it's been 29 years since the Bull rolled to a Florida Derby win. Scott Shapiro joining me. Time flies, my friend, and that's a good reminder of it.
Sure does. I'm dating myself here, but I do remember Holy Bull pretty distinctly. It was during my collegiate years at the University of Wisconsin, so it wasn't quite as on top of things. But man, that was a very talented racehorse. Of course, Horse of the Year in '94, winning the Florida Derby. Definitely a deserving namesake for this race.
You were in college. I was a mouthy, inquisitive 10-year-old asking everybody questions at the track about who they liked and how they handicapped. But here we are looking at this edition of the Holy Bullets. Again, we're on the road to the Kentucky Derby. The leaderboard has largely unchanged from recent events that have gone on, but we'll see some shakeups, I think, at the very least in this particular field.
Yeah, we will. The Holy Bull, obviously, anybody that wins this race will get 20 points. Arabian Night not eligible to get points off that win in the Southwest. But I do think if he does become eligible for the Kentucky Derby and starts accruing points, he's kind of put himself at the top of the pecking order at this point. But it'll be interesting to see who steps up in the Holy Bull and kind of puts themselves as the leader or one of the leaders down in Florida.
Let's start with your pick, number 4, Cyclone Mischief, who's made one foray into graded stakes company so far, unsuccessfully in the Kentucky Jockey Club back in late November. But he's one of a number of runners from that race that has since come back to perform well, and I think really backed up that performance, including the winner, of course, Instant Coffee. He bounced right back with a huge win against one other then company early in January. Are you buying that Cyclone Mischief versus the one that we saw in late November at Churchill Downs?
I am. I think it was a pretty impressive step forward, albeit at one turn, not the two-turn distance that we saw him break his maiden at Keeneland and then come back in the Kentucky Jockey Club, which you just mentioned. But what I thought was most impressive was it's a horse that had been on the front end, didn't look like a horse that really wanted to relax, and he did relax very well in that first level allowance event on January 8th, which I do think bodes well. Obviously, having early speed is a huge asset, but needing the lead in these types of races might not always work out well. You always have some sprinters stretching out. Cyclone Mischief, Nick, just really hasn't done much wrong. You mentioned the 7th place effort in the Kentucky Jockey Club, but that was a blanket finish that day. Kind of an oddly run race. It fell apart to an extent. Curly Jack, the runner-up, had some trouble. I just think this is a horse that shouldn't have any problem stretching out as we get to further distances and should be able to work out his own trip in here.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer the Kentucky Jockey Club pace actually worked against the horses that were forwardly placed because the closers were so close. And in a quarter-mile sprint between speed horses and closers, the closers are always going to have a massive edge, especially if the deficit is so small. My concern with Cyclone Mischief, and I completely agree with you, he is the horse to beat by a mile. I wonder how much Lasix may have helped him last time out. They will, of course, race without Lasix here in the Holy Bull. Speaking of horses that performed at Churchill Downs late in November, I went to the 8 Rocket Can, who was second in an allowance race that you and I have discussed now once before, talking about it last week with regards to Hit Show, who was entered in the Southwest but was scratched, and he'll go Saturday in the Withers. I thought Rocket Ken really improved stretching out in distance at Churchill. I think he really sort of quashed any fears about having an affinity for a wet track when he came back and ran as well as he did last time out. The horses that have come back out of that race have validated the performance and the figures. I'm wondering if this might be a horse that's just a little bit progressive and moving forward at the right time.
No, he was my other alternative in here for sure, Nick. I think I underestimated his 2 performances at Churchill back in the fall when I was there. I didn't really take notice of his efforts. The 2-length win over the offgoing, like you said, kind of at the time attributed to the flop. The race, the field that day was just okay, but he did it pretty impressively and pretty easily. And then, like you said, backed it up in that fast run allowance event where Confidence Game ran really well on the front end. Rocket Cam was sitting just off. He had that kind of trip, and an outside stalking trip in his both of his races in Louisville. I think he should get another really good trip from out there, or another horse that I think can work out his own trip. He can be up close if he needs to be. In this race, I think he'll be a little bit further off it, though.
I would imagine he'll be a relatively square price at the windows as well. Let's talk about a couple of horses who contested the Mucho Macho Man back on New Year's Day. That was a race where Legacy Isle, who's back here and is the sixth today with Luis Saez, was disqualified for interference in the stretch. They ended up placing Dreaming of Kona first. Legacy Isle, to me, looks like the clear speed here and a bit of a dangerous horse, having improved as much as he has in his last two starts, including having shown a great deal of early foot.
Yeah, I mean, he showed some dealt with some adversity, two back, sitting just off the pace, didn't get out of the gates well, and overcame it and won for fun. He enters this spot, pardon me, having hit the wire first in 3 straight races. And these are the kinds of horses that I can, kind of fool myself on, Nick, thinking that they're not true Kentucky Derby contenders. But at Gulfstream Park on a mile and a 16th, if you're loose on the lead, being able to get a true 2-turn race doesn't always come into play. And you mentioned Luis Saez aboard. So Legacy Isle, probably a horse that I'll end up omitting on top at least, but he is very dangerous if he's loose on the front end.
Results like Wildcat Red wiring the Fountain of Youth come to mind there. A horse that was running at him late in that Mucho Macho Man was the one Lord Miles for Saffie Joseph Jr. and Irad Ortiz Jr. He comes back now, third time out. That was his first try against winners off an impressive debut effort. Adding blinkers, he's drawn on the inside. I think at the very least you can plan on him making some noise late.
No, I like Lord Miles to run pretty well in here. Big step up to an extent. First time tried 2 turns. That was a nice run late, like you mentioned, in the Mucho Macho Man, and a really nice run on debut. You're a little more familiar with the quality of those fields down there that time of year in terms of what he beat, but he did it nicely. So one time, the dam of this one, first full, but it's a half to Caledonia Road, who won the 2017 Breeders' Cup Juvenile Filly. So again, reasons to believe that as the distances get longer, this is a son of Curlin that should really appreciate it. And you get Irad Ortiz Jr. I would be surprised if he's not running on late to at least some extent.
I agree. I think we've covered all our bases in the Holy Bull. Anybody else you think can slide in there for a share?
I think we covered him. Maybe Mr. Bob, who had trouble in the Mucho Macho Man, will be more prominent. I don't know if he's a horse that I like at a mile and a 16th, but the blinkers go on. Joel Rosario takes the call. You expect him to get out of the gates much better. Maybe with the blinkers going on, drawing inside Legacy Isle, he could be a pace factor, but with Joel aboard, we know he's not overly aggressive in most cases. So he's an interesting horse to take a look at. Not one that I'll be betting, but just worth looking at because he did get that poor start last time out.
That's an extended look at the Holy Bull. Race 10 on this 12-race card at Gulfstream is the Forward Gal. We're going to throw out a couple of selections in there. Scott, where'd you land in race 10, the Forward Gal?
Yeah, this race came up pretty strong, Nick. I thought there were a lot of ways to go. I'm going to go with number 9, Positano Sunset, a daughter of Golden Sense that makes her 3-year-old debut. I think she ran a couple of really good races when we saw her last in the fall here in Kentucky. An impressive maiden-breaking performance. Prior to that, a trouble trip second to a very good-looking horse in Julia Shining. So Positano Sunset for me.
Keen observer of sunsets that you are, none better than the ones that you'll see in Positano. I went to the 3 Atomically, who was first-time Todd Pletcher in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. I thought did a little bit more running early than she's comfortable doing, having to stay close to that pace, and that really sort of negated any bid that she had late. She's cutting back in distance. Jose Ortiz getting on board. I think there's a lot of speed in here, and I think one of the things, I think you're feeling similarly in that Positano Sunset can sit a little bit off the pace. I think the same of Atomically, who will likely settle and make one run. Scott, thanks so much. That's a good look at both the Holy Bull and a quick flash at the Forward Gal.
Yeah, should be a fun, another fun Saturday down in Hallandale Beach. Best of luck to you this weekend, Nick.
Thanks, Scott. We continue our march towards the first Saturday in May and the first Friday in May as well. Make sure you're playing along with us along the way at TwinSpires.com. Until next time, best of luck.